Good morning. My name is Catherine Farrell. Today I'm going to present to you some of the work that we've been doing on the INCASE project. So INCASE stands for Irish Natural Capital Accounting for Sustainable Environments. And this morning, it's really in the context of the contribution of limestones to Ireland's natural capital. So what I'm going to present is an overview of the project that I'm working on. I'm going to introduce some of the concepts around natural capital, what are the drivers, the definitions. Then I'll discuss natural capital accounting in the context of geosystems and how we can bring geosystems into that accounting framework. And then specifically in the context of limestones, which relates to the theme of this conference. And then we'll discuss some of the key messages. So I suppose from the outset, I should mention that I am an ecologist and that I have relied greatly on the support of Donal Daly in bringing this presentation together. So just to recognize Donal, who I am sure most of you know. So in terms of our project, the project is funded by the EPA. And so we've broken it neatly into a number of work packages. So initially, when we started over a year ago, we looked into what are the various types of natural capital accounting approaches, the data sources that we would, or the types of data that we would need. And following from that, we're now in sort of the meaty part of the project where we've selected 4 different catchments, and we're going to apply the accounting methodology across those four. But then also linking with the economic impact of natural capital. So trying to align natural capital with, the flows of services, the goods and services that come into the economy. And I suppose the key message here is that we're really in the meaty part. We're working on fine-tuning a set of accounts for the Dargle catchment, which is in Wicklow. And so it's innovative, and it's definitely been a very interesting learning curve for all of us involved in the project. If you'd like to read more about where we're at, you can visit our website at www.incaseproject.com, or we do have a feasibility report which we published in the spring, and that's available from the EPA website. So in terms of just a bit more information about the project, it's very much a multidisciplinary approach. So very interesting to bring ecologists like myself, who's worked mostly on peatlands through my career, with Jane Stout from Trinity, Stephen Kinsella, he's an economist based in the University of Limerick, Mary Kelly Quinn, who's a real champion for freshwater studies in Ireland, and Cathal O'Donoghue from Galway. And then interestingly, we have some of the key authors of the UN system of environmental and economic accounting, which is the approach that we're actually using in the INCASE project. And then my colleague Lisa, who's working as the GIS guru to bring all the data sets together, and then Orla Delargy from the Irish Forum on Natural Capital. So they're really coordinating the communications around the project. So multidisciplinary, a lot of trying to get our heads around economics and the economist way of thinking, and then of course how to frame this all in a sound ecological and geological way, because we're talking about ecological and geological assets. So in terms of the key concepts, so what is natural capital? So I've used here the definition from the Natural Capital Coalition, which brings businesses and agencies together. So they've defined natural capital as the stock of renewable and non-renewable natural resources. So that includes plants, animals, air, water, soils, minerals, that combine to yield the flow of benefits to people. So it's very much in the language of stocks and flows. And really that brings it into a similar language as we use for economics. So in economics, we talk about, well, economists talk about stocks and flows, and here we're trying to develop natural capital as an economic metaphor for nature. So trying to give economists that way in, that point of entry into the language of ecology and geology. So when we talk about stocks and flows, I find this diagram really useful. So we have our natural capital on the left, we have our economic activity in the green on the right, we have the flow of goods and services from left to right, but then also the impacts of our activity. So we can see that as our activities are ongoing, we impact on our natural capital, reducing our natural capital stocks, and therefore the flow of goods and services. So how do we develop ways of sustainable use of our natural capital to avoid the reduction in our natural capital, which is so obvious across all the different systems in terms of how biodiversity has been lost and the erosion of our natural capital, basically. And ultimately, that means less economic activity. So the World Economic Forum has listed biodiversity loss as one of the biggest risks for business in the coming years. So like, that's huge. We're now actually linking our natural capital with our economic activity and saying that, you know, we basically can't survive or have healthy economic activity in a planet where things are suffering. So the drivers seem obvious to us, but just to highlight a few of those. So there's this growing recognition that all capitals rely on natural capital. We have this plethora of policies like the CBD, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, EU Green Deal, which was announced last December. And what does that say? It says that all EU policies should contribute to preserving and restoring Europe's natural capital. So that's a very strong statement and commitment to natural capital. And then in Ireland, we have a new division of ecosystem accounts set up within the CSO. And then, of course, we've all these action plans around climate, and we have the National Biodiversity Action Plan. And you know, it's all pointing to the fact that we need to start taking nature into account. So I find this pictorial of the Sustainable Development Goals shows that they call it the wedding cake version, which really highlights that natural capital, that's the water, the geology, the earth systems underpins all of the other sustainable development goals. So unless we get this base layer right, unless we can keep it healthy, we're at nothing, basically. So how do we account for nature and what systems do we use? So we'd say for our system of national accounts, we have things like GDP, so we record the flow of money in the system. Then for population data and for social interactions, we record, you know, we have the census, but how do we record our natural capital? So this is what we're exploring in NCASE, and that's where the natural capital accounting comes in. So there are different approaches at different levels. So businesses apply natural capital accounting, and other countries have, you know, taken different approaches. But what we have decided to use is the UN System of Environmental Economic Accounting. So that's a systems approach to sustainability. It's got a number of manuals and guidance notes attached to it. So they have the central framework, which has been published and accepted as a statistical standard since 2012, while this ecosystem accounting standard is in revision and is set to be published in 2021. So that's the system that we're using, recognizing that it is an experimental one. So therefore, what we do can also inform how the system gets rolled out across other countries. What does it do? So, you know, why would you bother with natural capital accounting? So I suppose in essence, what it does is it brings nature into the arena of decision making. So it brings the information that we have about the flows of goods, of services from these stocks into the economy. And what happens when the stock is of poor condition? How does that affect the flow of goods and services? And ultimately, we all want to get to a point where we can make better decisions around the environment. And that's the purpose of this system. So we're looking to see how can that work? How does that need to be set up in Ireland for this to happen? Can it happen with the data sets that we have and with the level of engagement? There is a basic accounting model which splits up the stocks and the flows. And again, that's the model that we're applying. And so the system is experimental from an ecosystem accounting perspective, but for the In-Case project, we're extending this to include the geosystems. So things like limestones and the flows of goods and services from that. So this is a new use for this accounting model, and I suppose it's a really good way of bringing geosystems into the equation as well. So the key message here is that we have ecologists, geologists, economists, and agronomists. You know, we all have to be sort of challenged to step out of our silos to integrate, you know, our information systems and how we can make better decisions around how we use our environment. So it's this systems thinking. It's recognizing that we have our ecosystem services, you know, which there's lots of talk about. There's atmospheric system services, and then we have these geosystem services, which is the focus of this presentation. So how can we frame our stocks of our geological assets? What do we have? So working with the GSI, we have set out that we have a number of stocks. Basically, we have our bedrock. It's the foundational layer of all the other geo assets, but then we also have metallic minerals, non-metallic minerals, our hydrocarbons, subsoils, and then we also have our groundwater, which, you know, is the focus of a number of presentations at this meeting, and the geothermal energy potential, and also the geoforms. So those are the different stocks that we're going to look at accounting for as part of the In-Case project. Today, and for the paper that we've put together for this proceedings, we're focusing on the limestones. And so here we've looked at the extent, we're looking at the condition, we're looking at some of the pressures on the limestones, some of the indicators that we can use for condition, and then the services. So we can clearly define provisioning services, so the groundwater as a drinking source, the metallic and non-metallic minerals, the regulatory function of the subsoils to attenuate pollutants, and then of course the geological heritage and tourism, which inform the cultural services. So within the paper, we framed the different headings here, and then really drawing on this Indicon report, which was published recently, to highlight some of the benefits, some of the economic values that have been highlighted within the Indicon report. So I'll allow you to go to the paper for the detail, and I'll give you some of the headline findings. So in terms of extent, so obviously here we have the extent of the limestones, which go right across Ireland, across the Midlands belt and beyond. And so groundwater as a resource, so drinking water being one of the main services provided. And so I suppose just to highlight the benefit of that is within the Indicon report, they've highlighted that that is of 41.3 million annually. So a high proportion of the groundwater supplied by the limestone aquifers. Automatically we see that these groundwater aquifers are really important. They need to be protected, understood, and preserved. But then also, how do we track the contribution that these groundwater systems provide to groundwater dependent ecosystems, the terrestrial ecosystems, and also the role that they play in flood control and flood regulation? So those kinds of services are often overlooked and undervalued. So we're going to explore ways of bringing them into focus and how we might measure or value them. The geological heritage piece has really been highlighted for us working in the Darga catchment, where we're sort of trialing a lot of our work at the moment. So the geological heritage of the limestones, the burn, you know, the flow of goods and services that creates, and all the other limestone features across Ireland. So it's estimated that that can bring in the order of 176 million to the economy. So huge value, but again, not often recognized. So the key messages that, you know, we have today are that, you know, within the InCase project, we're trying to bring natural capital into focus. It's those values of the ecosystems and the geosystems and the services. Some of those values, you know, we can bring them into a monetary framework, but some things can't be brought into that monetization process. And that's simply by recognizing them and having them listed and having them measured, whether it's in terms of qualitative, quantitative, sometimes in terms of volumes or acres. You know, that's important to bring those into focus. And why? Because if we don't take it into account, what does it mean? If you don't account for it, it has no value, it's useless. And I suppose we're drawing a lot on the experience of countries like the UK and the Netherlands, and they've got some really interesting approaches to natural capital. How we're doing it, we're using the system of environmental and ecosystem, the system of environmental and economic accounting, and specifically the ecosystem accounting methodology to also include geosystems and atmospheric systems. The focus here today has been on the limestones, and that's the detail more so in the paper that we put together, but really highlighting, you know, the flow of goods and services, and that these are really important aspects of our natural capital. And I suppose one of the key things that I've learned, particularly over the last year in working on the project, is that we need to work with ecologists for the ecosystems, but equally, we need to work together with the geologists to highlight what the stocks are, what are the pressures, you know, what are the issues, what are the policy instruments relating to the use of this natural capital. So today is a bit of a conversation starter, and I would really welcome input from anyone here who's interested to get to know more about natural capital and indeed to help us in the project. So within the project, we'll be working in 4 different catchments, and please visit our website and you can sign up to our newsletter for more information. So thank you for listening. I'm just going to post some links here that you can follow up on yourselves, and obviously I'll be available for questioning, and do contact us if you're interested in the project. Thank you.